You count on Native America Calling for timely and entertaining conversations every day. Now, Native America Calling is counting on you. We are ending the year with a fundraising drive to keep the conversations going. And when you make a donation of any amount between now and the end of the drive, December 31st, you'll be entered to win 2 Alaska Airlines tickets as our thank you for supporting Native America Calling. Go to nativeamericacalling.com and click on the button that says Donate Today. Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. AIM activist Leonard Peltier's surprise release from prison was among the biggest news events of 2025. The year was also a time of uncertainty for tribes and Native-led organizations following a barrage of presidential executive orders and historic cuts to federal funds and staffing that affects programs from food distribution to higher education. We'll look back at the year's top news stories with expert Native news editors and reporters and look ahead to what's next. We're back after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Antonia Gonzalez. Before the year's end, President Trump is expected to sign a bill that would give Alaska Native veterans an extension to file for their Native allotments. As KNBA's Rhonda McBride tells us, more time is needed to help veterans navigate what they say has been a cumbersome and frustrating process.
After several failed attempts to get the Senate to pass an extension, the window for Alaska Native veterans to claim federal land was about to close forever. But on December 16th, Alaska Senator Dan Sullivan's bill passed by unanimous consent. The Republican senator had tied the veterans extension to 3 other bills that had bipartisan support.
It wasn't easy, but we got this done at the buzzer. It's going to be signed into law. It's going to go over to the White House. The president's going to sign this, and we're going to get to work and get these heroes the land allotments that they deserved.
Benno Cleveland, president of the Alaska Native Veterans Council, has waited for this moment for a long time.
I felt very happy, content within the heart. We've been battling with the Alaska Native Vietnam Veterans land allotment for over 30 years.
The extension now gives Alaska Native veterans until 2030 to claim 160 acres of federal land, made available to them under a law Congress passed more than 100 years ago. But when the federal program ended in 1971, Vietnam vets missed out because many were overseas fighting the war. An estimated 2,000 veterans are eligible for this program, but as of mid-month, only about 25% had filed. Native vets said they had difficulty meeting the deadline due to a complicated process and limited land availability. Cleveland hopes the extension will allow more time to convince Congress to make more federal land available for veterans closer to their homelands. He says they deserve it.
We've gone through hell, but we went when our country called, and we did our duty to the nation and to our people.
Cleveland says it's a shame politics gets in the way of honoring veterans, but the important thing, he says, is that Congress finally got the job done. In Anchorage, I'm Rhonda McBride.
A Wisconsin tribe is suing the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. As Danielle Kading reports, the Bad River tribe has filed a lawsuit to overturn a federal permit for a Canadian energy firm's plans to reroute its oil and gas pipeline.
Earth Justice Attorney Gussie Lord represents the Bad River Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. Lord claims the Army Corps violated federal environmental laws when it issued a permit this fall to Canadian energy firm Enbridge. She says the agency failed to adequately review environmental effects of the company's plans to build a 41-mile segment of its Line 5 pipeline around the tribe's reservation.
They didn't do that in a number of ways, including threat of oil spill, threat of impacts to on and off reservation exercise of treaty rights, and also the state's water quality certification has been challenged by the band, and that's not final.
Enbridge wants to build a new stretch of Line 5 after the tribe sued in 2019 to shut down the pipeline on its lands. Bad River Tribal Chairwoman Elizabeth Arbuckle said the tribe and other communities would, quote, suffer unacceptable consequences in the event of an oil spill. An Enbridge spokesperson said the company's permit is not yet final, but it plans to defend the Corps' upcoming decision in the lawsuit. For National Native News, I'm Danielle Kading.
On Friday, a jury ruled in favor of the Native-led organization Indian Collective and individual plaintiffs in a discrimination lawsuit against the owners of the Grand Gateway Hotel in Rapid City, South Dakota. Indian Collective will be paid $1, a request made by the organization. I'm Antonia Gonzalez.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support by AARP, whose Family Caregiver Resource Guide is available to caregivers by calling 877-333-5885 or at aarp.org/caregiver-resources.
Support by Drummond Woodsum, a full-service law firm whose nationally recognized tribal nations practice provides services to tribal nations and their enterprises and to companies that do business with tribes across the country. More at dwmlaw.com.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Sean Spruce. When Leonard Peltier walked out of a federal prison in Coleman, Florida in February, he was greeted to a hero's welcome from many supporters who view him as a symbol of a corrupt federal law enforcement system run amok. Since then, he has given a number of interviews and made public appearances, remaining unrepentant in his activism for equity and awareness for Native Americans. We'll hear from our expert panel of news watchers today about how the news of Peltier's release continues to play out. We'll also talk about changes Native Americans face with Donald Trump's first year in office as president. And we'll touch on the recent federal recognition of the Lumbee Nation in North Carolina after generations of trying and considerable opposition from neighboring tribes and others. We'll discuss these notable events and others from 2025. As always, we welcome you, our listeners, into the conversation. Give us a call. The number is 1-800-996-2848. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. Let's now meet today's guests. Joining us first from Norman, Oklahoma, is Graham Lee Brewer. He's a national reporter for the Associated Press and a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. Graham, welcome back to NAC.
Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
Joining us from Grand Rapids, Michigan is Levi Rickert. He is the publisher and editor of Native News Online and Tribal Business News. He is a citizen of the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation. Levi, welcome back to NAC to you as well.
Hey, miigwech for having me back, Sean. It's always good to be here.
Always great to have you, Levi. And joining us from Nananizod, New Mexico is Jordan Bennett Begay. She is the managing editor of ICT News, and she is Dene. Jordan, you've been on the show many times also. Welcome back.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And joining us from Portland, Oregon is Melanie Henshaw. She is an Indigenous Affairs reporter for Investigate West. She's a citizen of the Muskogee Nation. Good morning, Melanie, and welcome to Native America Calling.
Hey, Che. Thanks for having me, Sean. So glad to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show, Melanie, along with our other guests. And I want to begin today with Graham Lee Brewer, and let's talk about Leonard Peltier, because, Graham, you were actually the first person to interview him in person after he was released from prison. What do you remember most significantly about that interview?
Well, I mean, it was a pretty surreal moment, as I'm sure you can imagine as a reporter, one that I wasn't sure I'd ever find myself in. But yeah, it was a really interesting morning. Got to spend better part of a few hours with Mr. Peltier, getting to see his house and the way he's living now and ask him about the future. But, I think to your question, the thing that I'll remember the most was just his optimism for his, this next phase of his activism, but also the anger that I think still lingers from his time in prison and what he thinks has been taken from him over that, 49-year prison sentence.
Well, he has almost a mythological status among some people, but of course questions remain about his case, and they'll probably never be answered. Graham, how does a reporter navigate that gray area?
Well, I think just kind of giving Mr. Peltier the opportunity to say in his own words how he feels about certain things. There's certainly no shortage of controversy around him and his case. Certainly there was a lot of pushback from the federal government and federal authorities about his release. And one of the things that's usually missing from those discussions was Mr. Peltier's voice itself. And so I think that was one of my biggest priorities when I was there, was to just ask him directly how he wanted to respond to all sorts of things about him in the news and what he's paying attention to, and give him a chance to respond.
And do you keep in touch with him? Have you talked to him recently?
I haven't spoken to him recently. I have been keeping up with news on him. He's still very active. He's still speaking to reporters. Obviously, he's still confined to the reservation. I believe he has a 100-mile radius that he's allowed from his home that he's allowed to visit. But he just did an interview just a few weeks ago with Democracy Now! Where he said that that's still very burdensome because just going to the post office or the grocery store, he has to check in with his parole officer.
Mm. Well, certainly a huge event from 2025, and another really, really big, impactful issue for this year, of course, is the first year of Donald Trump's second term, and it's been marked by major federal government cuts, and these include cuts at the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Indian Health Service, Indian Education. Is it clear what the impact of these cuts are for Native Americans yet, Graham?
No, I don't think so. I think there's still a lot of unanswered questions, no matter what area of the federal government you're looking at. I think most recently you're seeing a lot of confusion with the Department of Education being dismantled, and a lot of services that fulfill treaty and trust responsibilities to tribes within that department have been transferred to other places like Department of Labor and Department of Interior. And so there's a lot of concern, not just from tribal leaders, but also legal experts who want to make sure that those trust responsibilities are fulfilled. When you're, removing the staff that have long handled these kind of things and not transferring them or detailing them to these new departments, that's one of their concerns and one of their hopes that they'll see happen. But again, that all that still remains pretty uncertain. I think there's also a lot of questions about funding when it comes to education. Certainly Indian Health Service. There's a wide variety of trust responsibilities that have been really directly impacted by the Trump administration's focus on trying to reduce the size of the federal government, whether that's spending or staff. And, obviously in this case, I'm talking about these staff members, federal employees that fulfill those trust responsibilities. This is across almost every agency in the federal government. There are people who make sure that those departments are in compliance with the law when it comes to tribal nations and tribal sovereignty. That can look like all sorts of things. Historic preservation comes to mind. And so a lot of those positions have been eliminated. So I think going into the new year, tribes are still going to have a lot of questions about how those services are going to be fulfilled and those promises kept.
Graham, if you look back a year ago, December 2024, of course, at that point, Donald Trump was he was president-elect, just about ready to assume office in January. Did you have any sense at that time, a year ago, just how consequential this second term would be for Native people?
I think that it's safe to assume that most people thought that a lot was going to happen. Maybe not so quickly in the first, just few months of the administration, first year, but I certainly think that people were prepared for seismic change, no matter what that looked like. And so certainly I'd like to be able to say that I saw a lot of this coming, but, the form that it takes might be surprising, but I don't get the sense that people were overall surprised that the Trump administration means a lot of significant impacts and changes for Indian country.
Let's talk about higher education. There were big cuts, and then there was a reinstatement of funds and also staff for tribal schools, high schools, colleges, day schools. Where are we now when it comes to the cuts for specifically tribal colleges? Are they out of the woods, or what do they need to be concerned about going forward?
Well, I think budgeting for a tribal college is always a concern, especially when you're a lot like a lot of other programs that are that come from tribal governments, that you're very heavily reliant on federal dollars to meet your annual budget. I think that kind of uncertainty, like I said, is always there. But even though there was an increase in federal funding, the tribal college administrators and presidents that I spoke to in my reporting are still really concerned about what the years ahead will look like. There's this huge push by the Trump administration to dismantle anything that has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And a lot of times you saw, especially early on in the administration with the Department of Government Efficiency making a lot of staffing cuts and program cuts, that sometimes things that benefited tribal governments and tribal nations got wrapped up in some of that those DEI cutbacks. And so tribes have had to make very forcefully the case that these are different. These programs shouldn't be put into the same box. And so I think there's still some of that lingering concern about what that could mean for certain programs. A lot of funding and grants and contracts that pay for tribal colleges directly get at this the inequities and lack of diversity in spaces like agriculture, for instance. And so to answer your question, I think college presidents at TCUs are still asking themselves that question, like what does the future hold? These are not federal dollars that are always in the same place every year. So it could be again next year we could definitely find ourselves having these same conversations about the polarization around tribal college and university funding.
Graham, we've got a break coming up in about a minute, but I have time for one more question. Do you see any bright spots at all for Indian country with regard to the administration's policies that were implemented this year?
Well, I mean, I certainly think that tribal governments always have the opportunity to assert themselves in different ways with different administrations. I think it remains to be seen how a lot of these things will play out in the court system still. Like a lot of those education questions are still lingering in federal court and stuff. So, but tribal governments do have really savvy legal minds and departments, and so I think there is some bright spots there that they could have some legal leverage to make sure that a lot of these these trust responsibilities that have been put into question will actually be fulfilled.
Graham Lee Brewer, national reporter for the AP, kicking us off here today on Native America Calling. Short break, and we'll come back. We're going to talk with Levi Rickert, publisher and editor of Native News Online. He also met Leonard Peltier this year. He's going to talk about that. And phone lines are open for those who would like to join the conversation. 1-800-99-NATIVE. After more than a century of rejections and close calls, the Lumbee Nation has secured federal recognition. They become an East Coast Native powerhouse with more than 50,000 citizens. We'll hear from Lumbees about what's next for the nation's 575th tribe. That's on the next Native America Calling.
Repatriation is the return of ancestors and stolen culture. The Association on American Indian Affairs is hosting the 11th annual Repatriation Conference, Feeding the Fire, Advancing the Movement, in February 2026. This fully virtual conference will offer small group interactive workshops, strategies, networking, and more to advance domestic and international repatriation. More at Indian-affairs.org. The association supports this show.
Thank you for tuning in today to Native America Calling. We are reviewing top Native news stories of 2025, from Leonard Peltier returning home to federal cuts to Indian education. Join the discussion by calling 1-800-996-2848. If you have insights, if you have perspectives, if you have questions, give us a call. That number also is 1-800-99-NATIVE. Levi Rickert joins us now. He is the publisher and editor of Native News Online. And Levi, you met Leonard Peltier when he arrived home to the Turtle Mountain Reservation earlier this year. What was that experience like for you?
Well, Sean, it was actually, I would say, as a journalist, one of the high moments of my year as a journalist, to see a man who, for the first time in 50 years, crossed back into his reservation. I was right at the reservation line, and I arrived at Turtle Mountain, and I got to the hotel, or actually the casino and hotel area. They say, "Hey, you want to be with his cousins?" as watching him come through the from the state highway into the reservation land. And I said, "Yeah, I'll be there." And so I was one of the first cars that arrived, and it was cold, bitter cold, Sean. Trust me, it was cold. It was like 17 or 20 below zero wind chill. It was cold. But anyway, by the time Leonard came through his caravan, I would say there were close to 75 cars at least, and people scattered throughout that highway. But to see him come through, and I had written so many editorials asking for a new trial, his release, etc., and the idea that it happened, quite frankly, I didn't think it was going to happen in my lifetime. I just didn't think it was going to happen. And I actually, years ago, I talked to Dennis Banks, one of the founders of the American Indian Movement. Dennis, I asked him privately, we were in a conversation, if it would ever happen. He said, "No, it will never happen." And other people, prominent natives that I've talked to, we didn't think it was going to happen, but it happened. So to me, it is very significant to know that he's out. He's, I was noted that he was not able to get to Alcatraz. He wanted to go for the Thanksgiving sunrise morning, but he sent a tape or a audio, and they played it through the PA system, and he was basically comparing what happened to Native Americans to what's happening in Gaza now. Talking about, we're all one and that type of thing in terms of solidarity. And I think that was just important, that his voice is very strong. He's to me, he's very iconic, and I could go on, but I won't. But it was a very significant moment this year. And then I was able to interview him on his birthday, first time in 49 years he spent his birthday outside, and we had him on our native Adaswe. It was quite a treat. So it was pretty exciting. But I want to say this, in terms of the transition, it was one of the President Biden's last acts in office, right? That was released to the press moments before he left the presidency. And so as you were already talking to Graham about the transition and what happened with the Trump administration 2.0, I just think it was like, wow, excitement for Native Americans, but yet we knew a storm was on its way, and it arrived. Trust me, it arrived.
Levi, I want to ask you about the Road to Healing with the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. You reported on this. How did the efforts to address the boarding school era change over the past year? How have they changed, and where are we going in terms of the future?
Well, I think that, the good news is NABS is still out there. The National Native American Boarding School Coalition still exists, led by Deb Parker. And just last week, right, our Attorney General here in the state of Michigan has called for an investigation of what happened in boarding schools in the state of Michigan. And there were two prominent, and then there were probably 4 or 5 others, and we reported on Friday. But I think it's just interesting that the work continues. And I was earlier this year, I was talking to Brian Newland, who was the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs during that time. And he and Deb Holland went around, and Native News Online went to every single Road to Healing listening session there was. And I told Brian, I said, Brian, I think that's going to go down in history as one of the most significant things you and Secretary Haaland did was form this investigation on boarding schools, and it's kind of like two parts. But the work continues, as evidenced by our Attorney General Nessel calling for a criminal investigation. And so we have an email into her office, haven't heard back yet, but want to hear about what led to this investigation now, right? Are there new developments as the office become aware of something new? But I think it's something that we in Native journalism we got to keep up on, because it is so significant. And as Secretary Haaland has said previously, and Assistant Secretary Newland has said, every single Native American family has been impacted by boarding schools, whether they recognize it or not. And I believe that's to be a true statement.
Levi, we talked earlier with Graham about federal cuts with regard to federally run programs and services, but also tribes have been impacted to a large degree. Withdrawals of funds and grants have been clawed back, even though they were already promised. Has the dust settled yet with regard to the tribal impacts, and how are they adjusting to this new reality?
Well, I think I agree with Graham. I don't think the jury's still out. I don't think we have seen them completely settle yet. There's a lot of confusion. Uncertainty remains. And one observation I've made this year is you have some tribes that are so big that, if they lose $5 million, it's like not overly significant. However, there are vast majority of tribes, you lose $5 million of your annual budget. It is very significant in terms of programming and services you can provide to your tribal citizens. But the jury's still out. It's just a lot of uncertainty. One thing that I've been trying to track is this revision of history, right? The administration called for the Smithsonian Institution to which runs the museums, and ours included the National American Indian Museum in Washington, D.C. and in New York. But, if they find something that supposedly is offensive, or they want to whitewash history, so to speak, sanitize it, I'm really concerned about that. I was talking to Chief Hoskin about that in September, and he said, Levi, he said, if the next administration comes in, we can build back. He said, however, if the damage has been done to those young people who may have seen that revisionist history that is not accurate, and like everything was great in America, and I for one think that they need to leave it alone, and this anti-DEI is like a cancer that is really impacting us more than we even think about.
Levi, your tribe, Prairie Band Potawatomi, recently made headlines with regard to a $30 million agreement with the federal government for an.
I knew it was coming.
You knew we had to talk about it. ICE detention facility. You weighed in here on this, and of course, after major backlash, tribal officials now say they are out of that contract. What happened here? What can you tell us?
Well, there again, I don't have all the details, and then our tribal council has basically, or the tribe has said, and I was talking to tribal council members and even the chairman, and within the last 2 weeks, they want to answer some questions in January at the first tribal council meeting, and I think the good news is, bad news is we actually accepted that contract, right? And it was like, my understanding is we were part of a co-contract with some other vendor that is going to perform most of the work. And my understanding is that they come to tribes because they think they're easy. We'll take the money and we'll just grab money. And the point to be made is that was the bad news. The good news is, to me, there was such a rebellion by tribes on social media and other tribal citizens, just lay people. I call them the Tommy Tomahawks of the world, right? But there was such a big pushback that my tribe really reacted in a positive way and said, hey, we don't want the ICE money. My tribal chairman told me that on day one that I found out about it a couple Mondays ago. He said, we didn't want their money. We don't want anything to do with them. Well, then it really does involved lawyers to figure out how do we get past this. And so I don't know all of the ramifications yet, but I'm proud of my tribe for reacting in such a way. But I really say thanks miigwech to the Indian country overall that really did the big pushback, which made my tribe react. And, the old line is sometimes you got to let the community police itself. Well, in a sense, Indian country policed itself on this one. And we're not the only tribe, though. And that is, I was talking to Brian Newland on Friday about it. And, there are other tribes that we need to take a look at involved with these ICE things. And there's fact remains, tribes need money. So, but we're vulnerable in that regard. And I think certain departments do see the vulnerability, and then somehow we got swept up in it. But I am proud of my tribe giving that money back, saying we don't want any part of it.
Levi, other big news, the Lumbee Nation in North Carolina now has full federal recognition. Both presidential candidates supported this action during the campaign. Were you surprised when it happened last week?
I think it got so political, and what I didn't like, what I saw was some of the reaction of all the various tribes, where we had tribes going against this, and it's done, and I'm hoping that some healing can take place and we move forward. They are federally recognized after 137 years. It happened. Whether people like it or not, they need to, I guess, in a sense, settle down, go with the flow, and say it happened. I personally don't like the Donald Trump involvement. That to me is just, I don't want to get overly political, but, and I know the Lumbees love him now, but, by and large, if you look at Donald Trump, he's a very corrupt person. And so I really don't like that aspect of it. His fingerprints are all over this thing. And so I'm having a hard time reconciling it. Personally, I really am. So,
what do you think this all means for other tribes that are still seeking federal recognition?
I think that the Lumbees are seen such a big political bloc. I think other tribes who are not as powerful or as big, I mean, what do they talk, 55, 60,000 membership, largest tribe now east of the Mississippi. Most tribes that are trying, they may have a few hundred, maybe a couple thousand, but I just don't see them having that political block to really do what the Lumbees have done. And I just don't think it's going to be like, it's going to be like, the spigot's going to be open now. I just don't see that.
Okay. Well, me as a resident of North Carolina, I'm just going to be really curious to see just how this impacts the overall state in general. It's interesting to be here, a resident, and see it all play out. 1-800-996-2848. That is the number for any listeners who would like to join our conversation today. Maybe you have thoughts with regard to Leonard Peltier's release. Maybe you have thoughts with regard to the budget cuts we've seen from the federal government and how it has impacted Native communities, or maybe you have thoughts with regard to Lumbee recognition. 1-800-99-NATIVE. Give us a call, and let's hear now from Jordan Bennett-Begay, managing editor of ICT News. And Jordan, this year ICT developed a series on Indigenous identity. It's really interesting. Tell us about it and why your team saw a need for this type of reporting in 2025.
Yeah, well, the Indigenous Identity series, actually, we waited on it for a few years after the Pretendian List came out, which was just floating around on social media. And I really wanted us to be thoughtful in that reporting and just to see what would happen. So we waited for the dust to settle and just kind of just talk to the community about what was going on, what was happening. We've heard, a lot of people, a lot of these, I think, Indigenous identity fraud, just came out. It was a big hit for a while. Now I think it's, just happened in another wave with the author in Canada. And I don't know, we just wanted to get it done right away. And it's just been waiting for a few years, but we really wanted to just, again, be thoughtful and very compassionate. And the goal, at least for me, when we were trying to explain to the team what we wanted to do here, was to not be the identity police. That's not our job. That's not what I want to do. if we if we focus on that, that would be a waste of resources, honestly. But I wanted to really look at how identity looks today and kind of, like hold a mirror up to people and just see, like, this is what we look like today. How is that different from 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago? And how is it going to look in 50 and 100 years too, right? And it just kind of just came up, Thomas King came out, and then the issue of Crow tribes, blood quantum issues came out. So it's kind of just riding this wave right now. We have a whole, bunch of reporting we want to do next year too.
And Jordan, what's been the feedback so far? Because again, this issue, identity, and you mentioned pretendism and everything else, and I can't think of any issue right now that's hotter and more contentious and more polarizing than this whole idea across Indian country.
It is. I mean, like I said, and this letter I wrote too is just like, each story is like a part of the conversation, and it's just, I really want the community to really look at themselves, and some people say just absurd comments, and I don't know if people know, like, elders are getting kicked out of their communities because of what's happening, and elders who have really contributed to their communities, who have opened doors for people. Again, there's I just want us to look at, and our community members to look at this in a holistic way, and to really also ask our tribes and ask ourselves, like, what are we doing? What do we want to look like? What are we going to look like in 50 years? What does being Indigenous mean, And, there's a lot of books that's come out too. Joseph Lee's books really addresses this too, and asking that question, what does it mean to be Indigenous? It's very, the feedback has been all over the place, honestly. I've gotten some really good feedback emails, and some people I've gotten some really not so good flack, but that's the point, right? That's the feedback I wanted to get. I wanted to ruffle some feathers, and it's going to continue to ruffle feathers, because I don't think some people are very, keyboard warriors, and they'll say what they want to say on social media, but when we have that face-to-face conversation, they don't want to talk about it, or they'll end up shouting at you, which I was trying to tell people, this is not a shouting match. I want you to think about how this is affecting your kids or your sisters, your grandmas, or communities. How is this affecting our entire people as a whole, right? It's really hurting people. And I saw one social media post a couple weeks ago, how this is really how it doesn't seem like accountability at this point. It's just people being cruel. So
okay. All right, we're going to take another short break. We'll come back and talk more with Jordan Bennett-Begay with ICT. Phone lines are still open for listeners, 1-800-996-2848.
Now more than ever, the supporters of this and all Native Voice One programs deserve a little extra love. Learn more about all our public radio underwriters and web-based sponsors at koahnic.org/sponsors-spotlight.
Kaufman & Associates is a Native-owned and led consulting firm supporting Native communities with culturally grounded solutions to shape Indigenous futures. More at kaufmaninc.com, KAUFFMANINC.com.
We're glad you're listening to us today on Native America Calling. What are the biggest events from 2025 that affected your life? Do you have good news to highlight from the past year? We are talking with a panel of expert Native news observers today, and you as a listener can join this conversation. Share your thoughts, share your perspectives. Call us at 1-800-996-2848. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. We have Jordan Bennett-Begay on the line right now. She is the managing editor of ICT News. And Jordan, Health Secretary Robert Kennedy Jr., ICT covered his outreach in Indian Country. How are his stated commitments to Indian Country playing out?
It is very interesting. We didn't really cover so much of him traveling around Indian Country, but we really covered the beginning of his being sworn in as secretary and all the IHS layoffs that were happening. And kind of after that, it was a matter of just trying to figure out how we strategically cover an ever-changing administration.
And of course, ICT is also the source for Native political candidates. And we have former Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, who is running for governor of New Mexico. Also, Paulette Jordan has a candidacy for governor of Idaho. Are there any similarities you're seeing between these two campaigns?
I haven't seen much just yet. I mean, we haven't really been following. The recent elections in November were just something that we were covering. It was more like the local elections, and even like trying to indigenize like elections that had a huge Native vote, such as the New York mayor election, and what New Yorkers thought about Zohran Mamdani right now.
And what is the feedback? I've been interested about that because there's like you mentioned, there's a large urban population of Native people in New York. How do they feel about a Democrat socialist Democrat?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, no. Oh yeah. So the feedback. Polly was the one who reached out. She was really interested in this story, and Polly DeNetclaw was our former political reporter. But we just thought the story was so important because New York has. It's argued that it's them in LA who have like the largest Native population of metro cities in the country. So she talked to the organizer for the Natives for Mamdani campaign, and initially they said that his campaign, they reached out to his campaign, they didn't reach out, but they still felt that it was important to be part of it because many of them have been living in New York for a very long time, and they very much aligned with a lot of his campaign promises. One of them is trying to stabilize the rent in New York City, and I know friends and family who live up there, and it's just it's really interesting just to hear what they're saying about having to constantly move from one bureau to another, and just you're paying so much money for a very small space to be living in the city.
Jordan, how about the tariffs? Are you seeing a big impact with regard to Native people or even Native businesses, tribes who might be involved in any kind of international commerce?
Yeah. So we had one of our reporters, Amelia Schaefer. She was really curious about this story. She talked to some folks who make regalia and just who do beadwork. But, with the rise of the price of tariffs, it has really been hitting a lot of these Indigenous designers and small businesses. They have probably noticed it maybe at the end of the summer, when people make jingle dresses, ribbon skirts, jackets, and everything that goes, on a jingle dress, like the cones, the beads, the fabric, the wool. They are imported from overseas, but when tariffs are, introduced, the cost of it is just very much increasing. One of the vendors was saying that they had to increase their costs by like 10% because they had to keep up with it, and it's just been very challenging for them overall. And we've even been seeing some similarities too with like holiday shopping. Like there are some markets out there where vendors are saying it was just like not busy, and it's just economically it's very challenging for a lot of Native people right now, and people are only buying essentials. They're just trying to get by right now.
Well, you mentioned the beadwork, and of course I just can't help think about powwows and more big news, of course, Gathering of Nations, Albuquerque, New Mexico. The huge monumental powwow has announced this next year will be the last. Do you think that's for real? You think it's really going to be the last? Any thoughts, any projections on what's really going to happen with GON?
That's a good question. We've been also trying to talk about that internally too. It could be the last, and with all the controversy in the last few years, I wonder if like even the student powwow at the University of New Mexico would be the next big one. And that's the question too, right? Is what could be the next big powwow? Some people are saying the Denver March powwow that happens a month before. I have no idea, maybe one will pop up, but I'm excited and kind of curious to see what will happen.
All right. 1-800-996-2848. Still time For any listeners who would like to join our conversation, we're talking about highlights, Native highlights, news highlights from the year of 2025. Leonard Peltier, Lumbee recognition, federal cuts. We're talking about it all today. 1-800-99-NATIVE. Join our conversation. Let's now talk with Melanie Henshaw. She is our fourth guest, and she is an Indigenous Affairs reporter for Investigate West. She joins us now from Portland, Oregon. And Melanie, you reported on the disproportionate number of Native youth in Washington state who are cycled through the criminal justice system. How serious is this issue, and what do the statistics tell us?
So thanks again for asking about this. I've been working on this investigation since July, so I really tried to dig into every part of the criminal legal system in the state of Washington. And what I found is that Native American kids are facing serious disparities at every level of the system. So from the first point of contact when they're arrested by police to whether or not they're given an off-ramp through something like a diversion program, like anger management or therapy. Beyond that, once they're convicted, they're also given harsher sentences, and they're also more likely to be charged as adults, which again subjects them to much longer sentences and doesn't actually lower the chance that these kids reoffend. So it's a serious problem for Native people in Washington state. And really one of the major issues that we're seeing is that recidivism for diversion programs is not that much lower, according to some data that came out this year, which has caused the state of Washington, King County, which is where Seattle, the biggest city in the state, is, to pause a large number of its programs that are jail alternatives for Native kids.
Melanie, Derek Bellegarde, what did you learn from him about incarceration becoming a revolving door?
Right. So Derek Bellegarde, he has this really amazing story of his own interactions with the justice system when he was a juvenile growing up in Central Oregon. And he essentially had a lot of interactions where he was in and out of jail, in his words, for probation violations. He had a truancy officer assigned to him at one point. But all of this didn't really help put him on a path towards a better life. And so ultimately, it wasn't until he became an adult and sought out treatment through the Chief Seattle Club that he was able to start walking the red road. And for him, it seems like he's now seeing that same situation play out among his clients at the Chief Seattle Club, which he now leads. And he's even having issues where he has the parents and then the children who are both coming through and both having interactions with the justice system. So this problem is present in a lot of Indigenous communities, and it hasn't really improved over time. My reporting showed that in the last 20 years, the rate at which Native kids are disproportionately arrested has actually just gotten worse, even though the state has been aware of the issue the entire time.
Is there any sense that this is happening elsewhere beyond just Washington state?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a pretty well-recognized pretty well-recognized issue in many states where Native kids are facing disproportionate rates of arrest. Washington is actually often held up as a beacon of a state in terms of the way that they have attempted to address these disparities in its system, whereas other states haven't. When you look at the Dakotas and you look at Oklahoma, there are some serious disparities in their criminal legal system that Native people are facing.
And the advocates who you were able to talk with, what are they doing and what do they see as possible solutions here?
So one of the top issues right now in Washington state is looking at life and long sentences for people who are already in jail. And these folks, around 40% of Native people who are incarcerated in Washington state had their sentence automatically lengthened because they were convicted as a child of a separate felony. So even though they had already served a sentence related to this juvenile felony, they interacted or were charged with a crime later on in their life as an adult, and that automatically lengthened their sentence. And right now, advocates are really pushing to have a bill that retroactively resentences the people whose sentence was extended through this system, which is called the points system. They've already, due to strong pushes by Native activists and a Navajo state representative, Chris Stearns, they have already eliminated the future use of this point system, but there's still a lot of people, hundreds, around 400 Native people who are locked up in Washington state prisons because of this point system. But this resentencing effort has really lagged in the legislature because there's some serious opposition from victims advocacy groups and law enforcement.
Melanie, this point system and all of these other policies that are driving this trend here, I mean, we can break that all down, but I'm curious to know what people are really saying behind the scenes with regard to what's happening here. And is there anyone just out and out saying there is racial bias happening in the Washington court system?
Yes. Multiple lawmakers have said to me straight out, this is evidence of systemic racism in Washington state system. They have told me that it's, quote, straight racism before, and they are willing to acknowledge the presence of these disparities that Native people are facing, but there haven't really been any targeted efforts to address these issues that Native people are facing specifically. So eliminating the ongoing use of the point system was a major win for a lot of the activists who pushed for this on behalf of Native people who were facing this disproportionately. But to address this past issue where you have around 400 people who are incarcerated based on the fact that their sentence was lengthened, there's not a lot of willingness in the legislature to address that right now. To be fair, a lot of these people are convicted of violent crimes, including homicide. And so there's a lot of pushback and fear from advocates for victims who don't want to have to face a resentencing process.
All right, Melanie, keep us updated with this issue, okay? Really appreciate you coming on the show. We have a caller on the line just in time before we wrap up. This is Grace, who is listening to the show online in Georgia. Hello, Grace. You're on the air.
Hello. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Grace, you sound great. What's your comment?
Okay. I am the editor of a weekly newspaper on the Cheyenne River Reservation, Lakota Reservation in South Dakota. And I just want to say thank you to everyone on the panel today. The work of people like your panelists who are leaders in Indigenous journalism, as we know, this work is a huge resource to me in bringing national and international news to the Cheyenne River Reservation that our readership is very interested in. And I, as an editor, I'm very interested in doing everything I can to tell these stories and give voice to those who in the past have been without a voice. And so I just really called to say thank you to everybody on your panel and to you, and know that you are making a big, big positive difference.
Grace, you make our day. Really, thank you so much for calling in, joining the conversation, and acknowledging our panel here today, our Native news experts. Really wonderful, wonderful contribution to the show, and I can't think of a better way to wrap up than Grace's comments. So with that, big thanks to our guests who joined us, Graham Lee Brewer, Levi Rickert, Jordan Bennett-Begay, and Melanie Henshaw. And if you like this show or you have any more insights to share or you'd like to comment, visit our Facebook page, our Instagram page. We also have Blue Sky and Threads, or just go to our website, NativeAmericaCalling.com. And don't forget, we will be back again tomorrow. We'll hear from Lumbee tribal leaders about the opportunities that lay ahead in light of their recent federal recognition. Until then, I'm your host, Sean Spruce. You've been listening to the one, the only Native America Calling.
Support for journalism that raises the awareness of child well-being to citizens and to policymakers provided by the Annie E. Casey Foundation, building a brighter future for children, families, and communities. Information at aecf.org.
Support from Clarkson Potter, publisher of Turtle Island, Foods and Traditions of the Indigenous Peoples of North America by Native American chef Sean Sherman. With ancestral and modern recipes, this cookbook showcases diverse foodways of the continent's regions. Support provided by Amarind. Amarind is 100% tribally owned and partners with tribes and their businesses to provide affordable commercial insurance coverage, protect tribal sovereignty, and strengthen Native American communities by helping to keep dollars in Indian country. Information about property, liability, commercial auto, and workers' comp available at Amarind.com. That's AMERIND.com.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.